Hello, welcome to How to Talk to Black Children About Ableism to Ensure a Positive Black Identity. Ableism is discrimination in favor of able bodies. And ableism is pervasive in all cultures all over the world. Even in Africa, albinism is present, where the very light-skinned, photosensitive people are treated differently up to today, and there's a mix of reasons why ableism exists. Ableism became more pronounced during the slave trade in terms of black bodies because the process of using human beings as tools, work tools, it then became necessary to find the ones that would be able to work the hardest, are able to work the hardest, right? So that was discrimination in favor of those who could work the hardest. And this kind of trying to find the ones that are fittest starts from the very beginning. So when the enslaved people were captured, they were put on a dungeon in places to wait for the ship, a full load of them to be shipped away. So there, people would die there. Then when they got them on the boat, some of our ancestors willingly jumped over rather than go with these people. And some of them died inside the boat and were thrown over. So we have this idea of the survival of the physically fittest coming down to when we get over here, we're the fittest of the fit. When we get on the plantation and the barbarism of that kind of lifestyle that's not fit for any human, then we start seeing disabling conditions coming about. Some of them are directly related to enslavement. Sometimes limbs would be chopped off, if you've listened to any of this, the upstate runaway enslaved people, you'll hear about toes that are frozen off, bullet marks on bodies. So enslavement physically damages bodies, as well as we don't know what are the other things, because they're developmental illness and all kinds of diseases that are indirectly related to enslavement, because it's a horrible condition. It's not the best place to be alive in, to grow healthy and thrive. Also, the lived experience of a person with a disabling condition on the plantation was that you're there to work. If you can't work as hard as you're supposed to work or as fast, then you'll get harsher punishment. One of the seemingly beneficial aspects of being a person with disabling condition is that the masters could not sell you off to somewhere else because no one wanted to buy you. But here comes the bad part. Because of the stigma attached to being a person with a disabling condition, other black people would not want to have romantic relationships with them because they did not want that stigma attached. Yes, it was a survival response inside of the group, but it was still extremely painful, and it still is today, to be excluded by white people and then find rejection inside the community where you're trying to find acceptance because you're different in some way. But that's another topic. Also, when the abolitionists started to challenge whether slavery was just or not, one of the arguments that was used to justify slavery and white supremacy is that really slavery was created to help black people because we're inherently disabled, we're inherently defective, we're inherently dependent. So they went for us all the way from Africa and brought us here to help us. So I'm going to stay very polite and say, if ever you go out in the world to help people and you realize on your way that you're harming them more than you're helping them, and that you are benefiting more from helping them than they're benefiting from your presence, remember you're not a helper of humanity, but you're a parasite and a thief. And I'll just gently move on from there. So, how do we actually talk to children? Again, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into always start with open ended questions. And I apologize because sometimes I assume knowledge because I'm here talking to myself. I assume everyone in this imaginary room knows what open ended questions are. It's simply questions that forces the person to give you a bigger response that's not yes or no. So it's usually with what. Um, do you know, would give you, sometimes you can start out with, do you know what the word ableism means? The person says yes or no, right? Then you push them a little bit. If yes, please define. So that forces the child to say more. Another, this is more like an open ended question, is please tell me about one of your friends, classmates, or teachers who has a visible disability. So it's impossible to say yes or no. Having worked with children and lived with people, sometimes even when you ask open-ended questions, they won't respond. And sometimes that is because they don't know and they're afraid of saying, I don't know. And that is something we should always allow children to feel safe about. And by us modeling it and saying, I don't know something, we're going to go together to the library and read more about it. And so it becomes like a trip to the library. And then it's just building in this inherent curiosity in children and also modeling for them to find reputable sources, not necessarily the internet as way of verifying information. Just like I shared with you, because I was doing something, I'm modeling for you what I want you to do with the children. Just as I told it as a story, teach them that ableism is a common feature of most society, but it was heightened during slavery because the bodies of black people were treated like tools. The third thing is to teach, model, and provide opportunities for children to learn that character is more important than abilities or occupation. Black bodies are coveted for their strength, for their abilities. And so sometimes we force kids, like, you're going to grow up to be a basketballer or something like that, while neglecting to tell the child that who you are, your character, is more important than whatever it is that you do. It's better to be a decent human being. If you have to choose between being a decent human being and a basketball player, choose decent human being. And then we could even go further and say, but if you're going to be a basketball player, you will be a decent human being. So it's not binary thinking. You can be both. So I don't want to negate people who have good abilities that we prize, but I also don't want to make it continue to have that ableist gaze that you're only as good as what you're doing. So then when you're no longer able to do it, we're deeming you as worthless. No, you're as good as your character. And that should be modeled and use stories, you can use books, you can use television, any way that you find that all of this should be always age appropriate and developmentally appropriate. Just like I'm doing in these videos, every face that is a real face is a real person with a disability, visible or invisible. So expose children to visual and in real life examples of people with disabilities, and teach them how to appropriately interact without causing harm or discrimination, like not objectifying people, not making strange remarks, not, and that comes from practicing. Two games that I loved growing up in Jamaica, because games can be used to teach these concepts, was that whenever the child that was picked last was always allowed to be something that we called a boatie. So the person was on both teams. So the person ends up getting more turns than everyone else. The indirect message I got from that was that whenever a person is weaker, you give them more opportunities to be strong. You don't take that away from them. And another thing, as Jamaicans are lovers of racing and sprinting and daring others to race them, is that whenever you think you're the faster runner or the fastest runner, you should always give the person a head start. We call that giving them a jump. So the person starts running before you and then you set off. If you're able to actually catch up and win, then you're indeed the champion. So again, it's saying, if I'm strong, I want to empower the other person to be as strong. I never want to win by snatching them from Africa and exploiting their labor and then telling them I mean them well. We just passed someone napping, and that's the last point I'm going to make. Teach children about bodies just being bodies and bodies at rest. We, as growing up in Jamaica, even when you're ill, they tell you to take a shower and sit up, because that's slave mentality. You must always be actively doing something. No, take a day of rest. Enjoy. And the nap ministry, that's one of the things. You can go on the internet and find it. Our bodies are important and worthy of love, whether we're working or resting. So thank you for listening.